I feel like both you and I also are kind of in a middle ground where we recognize, hey, if you're going to approach this like a sport, like you kind of got to do it as a sport sometimes.
Yeah.
And competition or shared suffering can sometimes bring that out of people. Like I said, I know you do the name game. I've done that, similar style thing with my clients at least once or twice a week. And what it's generally once a week for most of the year. And then as we get closer to the open or quarterfinals or specific competition,
Right.
it might end up being 2 or 3 days a week, right? Because once you get to that point, there's certain demands that regardless of what your current skill level is, you kind of have to do. And so I feel like we do that as well. So where maybe some other organizations fall solely on one side or the other, I feel like we kind of both utilize both aspects of that to help our clients kind of get the best results, in my opinion.
Hey, it's Ben Wise, and this is the Fitness Movement. The Fitness Movement is brought to you by ZOAR Fitness. ZOAR Fitness is my company and my platform to deliver training content to coaches and athletes like you. The site has educational resources on everything from program design and exercise physiology to skill progressions and movement breakdowns. And in terms of programming, we have our online training program, The Protocol, and I also offer one-on-one remote coaching. It's all at one place, ZOARfitness.com. Chris, welcome back to the show.
What's going on, Ben?
So we have some news. We're basically going to deliver the punchline here, and then we'll back up and talk about it a little bit more. But you are now a ZOAR Fitness coach. So congrats. How does it feel?
Feels amazing, Ben. It's what I've been waiting for my entire life. So no, it feels good.
Cool, man. So yeah, I mean, basically the way I look at it is like we're joining forces, right? Where you were doing this on your own. And I think it's going to be sort of the best of both worlds for us. Cause like for you, you get to focus on, instead of like all the business stuff, you get to focus on coaching athletes. And, you'll also maybe do some content creation and stuff for us. But like the main thing is going to be like, now you get to really focus on being a coach, which is obviously really cool. Do you see like other benefits of joining up?
Yeah, I mean, from multiple avenues, right? Like you talked about it, the business side of things. A lot of the social content creation, stuff like that is not a strength of mine, especially being that, as I have my hands in a couple different buckets right now. So, I didn't have the time or was, for lack of a term, wasn't willing to set aside the time, I should say, to do that. And try to take that away from other areas, especially coaching my clients. But definitely we've been bouncing ideas off of each other for, years now. And so I think to kind of combine forces in that regard as well. And then on top of it, you do stuff with the name game with setting workouts for your clients that are, standardized might not be the right term, but kind of like everyone's doing relatively the same workout. Let's call it once a week. I've done that with my clients before, but every coach has their programming biases. So, where we can pool together and kind of pull different programming styles to get more exposure for our athletes. I think that's only going to help each one of our athletes for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we were just talking about this before the call, but I mean, that's one of the things that I see as a huge advantage is like, I've programmed every name game workout up to this point. And like for you and your clients, it's the same thing. When you guys are doing your Saturday throwdown type thing, it's like, that's the exact same thing. It's really nice to get a different coach's bias because everyone has a bias. It's like, it's nice not to always have the exact same take on things and be able to, frankly, have my athletes do something that isn't programmed by me is actually benefiting them a lot. And it should be like vice versa. It'll probably be the same thing, right? Like I don't know what my bias is entirely. Like I probably had to do it to a certain degree, but a lot of it's probably unknown. But I mean, it's the same thing for sure for you. So that's certainly one of the things that I see as benefits. You kind of mentioned as well, like we were kind of having like we were calling on like mastermind calls, basically like basically it was like two friends who coach CrossFit who would get on calls and like talk through different stuff. And we basically like share different protocols for athletes, like talk about what things work or not work for skill work for certain things. Actually episode 43 of the podcast, when we talked through troubleshooting heavy squats, they're similar to that type of thing, right? Like that's what we were talking through. So it's kind of like a no-brainer is to, continue to do that, but have it be like even more strategic where it gives our athletes a distinct advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just to provide some background for folks, this is something, I feel like it's something we've contemplated and talked about on and off for a while. I mean, again, years ago, you were getting started and I had hit a client load that I was like, I don't know if I could take on anymore. And so I reached out to you and you're like, I'd entertain it for sure. And then, we never got personally, I never got to that, like that tipping point. Right. And then, we went back and forth and we had talked about potentially coming together before. And then, the time was kind of right now. So, it's definitely something that we've entertained in the past, as we'll call it in parallel, tried to like kind of grow our coaching businesses. And we've been kind of bouncing ideas off each other and discussing those things. And, I think both of us are relative nerds when it comes to, the fitness and the CrossFit side of things. So it allows for a good conversation, which again, in the end, just benefits the client, and kind of the experience that they get.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think you're super easy for me to get along with because we're very much alike, which, I think we're alike in maybe like coaching and the mindset around like a lot of that type of stuff, but like other skill sets outside of that are different. So it's complementary in that way.
For sure.
In terms of like the front that the clients and the athletes actually see is pretty unified, which is exactly what you want. Yeah. So I kind of mentioned this before, but I think we have, similar coaching styles. Could you maybe put your thumb on what that is exactly? Like, how would you describe your coaching style?
So I think some of the similarities are, we like to put a strong emphasis on program design and progressions and kind of setting long-term, maybe not long-term, but kind of, intelligent ways to get to an end goal. Right. And I know for some people that should be like duh, like that's kind of what comes with this, but you'd be surprised on how many people call themselves coaches. And it's like, okay, we need to work on wall balls. So my progression is we just do a lot of those in EMOMs and hope that we get better. In addition to that, I think we both, or I at least really try to focus on the movement side of things as well. Especially when you're looking at CrossFit as a sport, and we both are on the same page with this, when looking at CrossFit as a sport, the best, yes, they do a lot of work and they do a lot of volume, but they're the most efficient in those movements. And so a lot of time for people who are, sub elite should be spent on developing the skills to make those movements feel as easy as possible. So you're not wasting energy. And then, in addition to that, I like to coach the mental aspect of side of things. I kind of look at it again, looking at it from an athletic perspective, that all plays into it. Right. And so, what are your thoughts on game day? How do you fuel on game day? What are, what thoughts are you telling yourself when you step up to the bar? Hey, we keep having trouble doing this. What are the mental pathways you have going on there? And, I'd be lying if I said that those conversations happened with every client, because, some clients, for whatever reason, might not want to get into the weeds on that. But for the ones that do, I feel like tend to see the most success or have the most improvement. And so my coaching style tries to look at all three of those things. And then I feel like you and I are on the same page where we put a heavy emphasis on individual program design, because we feel that every individual has certain skills that they need to improve on, or there's differences. A great example is I have a client, the standard cookie cutter program is you do this on Monday, this on Tuesday. Well, I have a client who runs a meal prep business. And so like she's on her feet all day long on Sunday, cooking and kind of stressing. And we noticed for weeks that her Monday sessions were like really subpar. And so,
okay, I'm going to cut you off. So Stacy Cadenas is one of my athletes. She's a coach in the area and she runs a meal prep service. I never put it together, but her Monday snatch sessions were so bad for so long. Sorry, Stacy, we fixed it. All we did, we flipped her AM and PM sessions on Monday, and her snatches were great in the PM. And she's normally an AM person, but she's on her feet for like 8 hours a day on Sunday, prepping meals all day. So that's super interesting. Please continue.
Yeah. So, and again, that kind of speaks to what we said earlier, right? Where it's like, oh, we could bounce ideas off of each other. And it's like, you'll say something that might light a light bulb, but like, yeah, in this particular instance, I was like, we can't go hard on Mondays. Like we just can't.
Yeah.
I mean, we can, and she's super motivated and she'll run through a brick wall. But the thing is, like, we weren't adapting. And so I've adjusted our Mondays so like, I call it aerobic threshold work, but it's like that 60 to 70% aerobic, long, easy monostructural type stuff. Yeah. She does that in the AM, and the PM is all her structural work, right? We place a heavy emphasis on building her upper body strength, pushing and pulling to improve her gymnastics. And so she does a lot of that bodybuilding work in the PM. So it's very targeted, and it's improving the things she needs to work on, but not the pounding on her joints that, chest to bars in a Metcon would do, or snatch position work. And then we do all that on Tuesdays, and she feels great on Tuesdays, right? It's like she has that day buffer. And so there's a lot of individualization that goes into that. However, I feel like both you and I also are kind of in a middle ground where we recognize, hey, if you're going to approach this like a sport, like you kind of got to do it as a sport sometimes. And competition or shared suffering can sometimes bring that out of people, right? Or I talked about the mental side of things. Sometimes people fold under that, and that can be exposed in like a throwdown style thing. And so, like I said, I know you do the name game. I've done that, similar style thing with my clients at least once or twice a week. And it's generally once a week for most of the year. And then as we get closer to the open or quarterfinals or specific competition, it might end up being 2 or 3 days a week, right? Because once you get to that point, there's certain demands that regardless of what your current skill level is, you kind of have to do. And so I feel like we do that as well. So where maybe some other organizations fall solely on one side or the other, I feel like we kind of both utilize both aspects of that for, to help our clients kind of get the best results, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would totally agree. There's a few things that you mentioned I think are really good. One, I think like as a coach, I think both of us probably do this, and I don't think it's always a conscious thing, which is probably good. But like I sort of like mirror almost the expectations of my athletes. Like whatever they tell me that they want to do is typically what I mirror back to them as to like, this is where you're in alignment with or out of alignment with. So like, for example, if you're an athlete who comes to me and says that you want to make it to a semifinal next year and you're sleeping 6.5 hours a night, that is totally unacceptable. And like, we're going to have a conversation about it. Whereas if you're a mom of 3 and you want to compete and you want to get better, and that's still the conversation, but it's like, hey, like, I'm going to have to be taking care of the kids and doing this and that and like running around and like, hey, I have to be out the door at this time in the morning each day. It's like, hey, you might be getting 7 hours each night on a good night. And like, that's great. Right. And like, if that's the context of the conversation, like, great. Like, let's work with what we have. But and both of those people could be super competitive with themselves or within the community, but like the conversation is just different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of your listeners and especially your clients are, I've been on the podcast before, so they might have heard me before, but, they might be getting to know me more or anyone who's thinking about jumping in might be like, okay, what's this guy about? Frankly, at the end of the day, I really don't care what your goals are. I don't. Like, you can tell, it doesn't matter to me. Whatever your goal is, whatever your goal is, my job is not to tell you whether that's a good goal or a bad goal, right? There might be some conversation about like what it takes to get to that goal and the realisticness behind that, right? Like if someone tells me they've been doing CrossFit for 8 years, and it's a guy and their max squat clean's 185 and they want to make it to a semifinal, it's like, hey bro, like you got to add about 120 pounds at least to that squat clean. And you've already been doing this for a decade. Like, let's reassess that. But more often than not, that's not the conversation for me. More often than not, the conversation is, what do you want to do? Okay, this is what you want to do. Okay, cool. We're going to get the plan to go there. And then, like you said, it's recognizing things that are out of alignment, right? Again, I have a client who, her goal is to make it to that semifinal level, whether it's on a team or an individual or whatever. And I've already told her like, hey, we're getting closer to the point that like you might want to find 3 really good people around you to like make a push.
Yeah. You might need to
like,
move.
Yeah. Like we're not there
that's
yet.
That's probably the hardest conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That conversation doesn't have a lot, but
right.
Anyway.
But I'm like, we're not there yet, but I think team could be a great avenue for you, especially with what team asks of an athlete. Right.
Right.
But she loves competing and almost like too much. Right. So it's like, I've had to talk her out of like it's a lot of like, hey, my friend asked me to do this competition. And it's like, hey, I hear you. We already have these 4 on the calendar.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, if you want to go do that, and I say this, like, if you want to go do that, I'm cool. Like, that doesn't bother me. But you told me these were your goals.
Right.
And if these are your goals, this is going to go in direct opposition of what your goals are. Right. Like, you've done enough competing at the local level. Right. And so if you want to compete at a high level, you need to push to be at these high level competitions, and continuing to do these, monthly local competitions is not helping you anymore. It's not serving you anymore. So, again, we're in alignment with that. It's like whatever client comes in, whatever your goals are your goals. And it's not my job to tell you if it's a good goal or not, because it's your experience. And my job is to take that information in and say, all right, I'm going to pour every ounce of me into trying to get you to that goal, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. And, sometimes I get super excited too, if I'm working with someone like, and, they don't have a CrossFit goal, but they're super excited about something else, and that's their goal. Like, I'm super excited to work with them and help them to get them there. So like for me, and I'm curious as to what you think about this, for me, like my ideal client, if I'm thinking about that, is like, I just want you to take your fitness seriously, to be consistent, and then pick something to work for. Right. And like work hard to get there. And if you're like serious about your goals and getting there, like, let's do it. Like, we'll figure it out. Right. I feel like I'm enough of a generalist where I can help a lot of people. And I feel like, you're something that's way out of bounds for me. I'm going to let you know that. And you probably won't even find me anyway.
Right.
Do you have like an ideal client in your mind, that somebody that like you really like working with?
Yeah. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I wasn't partial to CrossFit. Right.
Yeah.
Like
same. Yeah.
That's what I really like to do. And so I really get geeked up for that. But if I was to take like a macro approach, I really enjoy people just like you, people who take their fitness really seriously and are goal oriented.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you know, it is so hard to write progressions for people when it's like, all right, I missed 2 days. I asked for a 5-day workout schedule. I missed 2 days a week. The days I miss are always different. Hey, I made it in all 5 days this week. I wasn't in for any of the days last week. And it's like, it's so hard to write for someone like that. And in your head and your heart, it's like, it's like, I have no idea where I'm at in this progression now. Like, I have no idea what's going on.
And it's not your fault as a coach either. And it's like,
right. And again,
that's tough, right? And you don't want to say like, hey, like, let's not work together anymore, because like you are still the best thing for that athlete. It's just like, it's sometimes it's having a tough conversation. And sometimes it's just like the person's lifestyle. It's like, unless they make a major change or stuff, it's not going to, shake out. So.
And again, it could be just simply revisiting the conversation, being like, hey, you said you wanted 5 days a week of workouts and these were your goals, but you really only come in 3 times per week. Like, why don't we just go to a 3 time per week workout schedule and reset our goals? And more often than not, I have that conversation with people, and they almost don't even realize that's an option. Like, you know what? I guess you're right. Like, I do only make it in 3 times per week, but I digress. Again, for me, the ideal client is, again, someone who's super, takes their training seriously, is coachable, and, has goals in mind. Like, I have a client that just popped in my head who had never once, when I was working with him, had a CrossFit goal. His goal was to make it to the military. Yeah. He was if I remember correctly, he was an engineer looking to get out of his office job and wanted to go into the military. And so they had a physical fitness test, and for those of you that don't know, and I think it was the Marines he was going into, it's like pull-ups, a mile run, and sit-ups or something like that, and push-ups maybe. And so we had to build those numbers. And so, I was way more targeted than a CrossFit athlete. But what was fun about it was like, he was so diligent about getting his workouts in, and, he was super coachable. Like in the beginning, he'd like get really hard on himself if he missed a day or wasn't feeling good. But I'd have a conversation like, hey, don't beat yourself up. You know what I mean? It's like, missing one day is not going to kill you. Beating yourself up about missing that day is, and he was like, you know what, you're right. And boom, he was better the next day. Right. And so folks like that are ones that are super fun for me to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people are like, have that high achieving mindset. And I've had athletes do that same thing, like really beat themselves up if they miss a lift in their session, or, the piece just didn't go as well as they were hoping for, or like whatever. Right. And I'm like, I'm writing training right now that is like hard. Like, I'm like, you always say like, you're riding the line, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking about, is like, I'm trying to get you as close to that ceiling as like, hey, if it's a bad day, you're not going to maybe hit these numbers, but if it's like a good day, like, yeah, you're going to hit everything. You're going to feel good. It's like, that's what we're kind of figuring out. Like, we want you to have as many good days as possible. So yeah, that's super cool. I mean, if I think about a client like that, it's sort of, it's almost like CrossFit in that it's just concurrent training, right? Like, you're doing a couple different things at once, and you're having to figure out how to balance those different progressions. Like, you might have one progression for a mile run. You might have one progression for doing, a max set of unbroken pull-ups. And you have to figure out how those two are going to interplay. In that case, it's probably not a whole lot of interference, but with something else, right? But it's like, yeah, it's fun to figure out those situations. All right. So in the same vein of that question before, in terms of ideal client, similar question. Some people probably think it's the same. It's not. What would you consider to be that type of athlete that you coach best, or that you are the best coach for?
Yeah. So I think right now, the athlete I've had the most experience with in relation to CrossFit, I think, is the athlete that is relatively competitive, can compete at a relatively high level, but is not like your semifinal level athlete at this time. I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I think I have this, definitely the skill necessary to coach one of those athletes. It's just not someone who's come across my path yet. But those are the folks where it's like, hey, we're a high level local competitor. We've competed at, some higher level competitions, but we're not, qualifying for the semifinals, right? We're quarterfinals level athlete, somewhere around there. Maybe we're still developing skills, whether it be gymnastics or weightlifting. And so I think those are the athletes, the intermediate level athletes are the ones that I tend to work the most with. And I have a lot of fun working with those athletes because, at the bottom level, right, someone who's relatively new, let's be honest, you could throw almost anything at them and they're going to get better, right? The top level athletes, like the elites of the elites, you're looking to find 1% or 0.5% to get them better. And, it's tough because you honestly might not know if you've got them there until 6 months down the road. And then it's just like, oh no, that progression didn't work or whatever. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for the athletes in the middle, it's really cool because you have to be very pointed in the progressions that you build out. You have to be very thoughtful about what strength progressions you use, what movements you're going to do, what drills you're using to build positions. You have to be, pay attention and be humble enough that when a workout comes out, like this year was a great example in the open, my athletes did relatively really well in workouts 1 and 3. And we universally, except for maybe one athlete, struggled in workout 2. And when I went and looked back, it was like, you know what, we deadlift a ton, but we don't do a ton of, moderate to light deadlifts in workout. And we didn't this past year. And I think that's what kind of slowed us down. So you have to be humble enough to look at that and reassess. But again, you still get to see the successes every couple of months, right? It's like, okay, I can build out a 12-week cycle and we still see the PRs because they're intermediate level athletes, right? And so,
Yeah.
I really enjoy coaching those folks, and they're super appreciative too. I think when they hit those new milestones, because it's like, oh, I've been doing CrossFit for 3-4 years and I'm still able to hit a PR. Like, that's super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it takes somebody who's fairly humble to say like, oh man, like across the board, we didn't do great on workout 22-2, but
Yeah.
like not blame.
Sucked.
Yeah. I mean, but like also not be like, oh, like, it's just because, we're running strength progression. So I'm not going to give them a huge amount of volume and barbell cycling, like, which is probably true. And maybe that's why, but rather than using that as like an excuse, like being like, okay, how can we do this better moving forward?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good perspective to have. Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is probably a pretty common theme. I think every coach, whether they'd admit it or not, has like a demographic of athlete that's best for them, who they can serve best and they really enjoy working with, where it's like, and that might shift over time, right? But like, personally, I don't think I had Dame Munoz on the show, and she started with me when she was completely fresh, had never done any CrossFit, and she started with me as a remote coach. I personally, she said that she wouldn't do it differently second time. That was her words. But I can't say that like I think that I'm the best coach for like the complete beginner novice. Like I would say probably like you're better off working with a coach that you can be in person with, who can give you real time.
100%. 100%.
So it's just like a real challenge. So like for me, I have a hard time like bringing back some of the jargon and things. Like I have a hard time weeding all that out of my language. So for like someone who's like, they've been around a while, they understand some of the fitness lingo. Like I don't have to explain what an AMRAP is to them, right? Like that kind of thing. Like I think at that point, like it just like, again, maybe this is across the board too. It's like, I think you can probably have a remote coach and sees good success from that because you're not such a complete beginner. You can be somewhat independent. So like, I think a lot of like that intermediate and up is like really like right in our sweet spot right now.
Yeah.
And, I think it's a number of things. I think it's one is like your remote coach, the systems that you have in place, the style of programming that you write, like the type of athlete that you like working with. Like, I think all that kind of plays into that. This is another thing. I don't know if we've talked about this specifically, but do you have certain like benchmarks that you find yourself giving to athletes a lot?
Yeah. I mean, for a client who's brand new, someone I've never worked with before, I always have certain benchmarks that I like to look at. I look to look at 1 rep max testing. So, your snatch, your clean and jerk, your back squat, front squat, deadlift, stuff like that. I'll look, that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, I'll generally look at like a half-hour row and a half-hour bike, and then kind of progress down the continuum. So I might do a 2K row as well, a 10-minute bike, maybe a 10-second bike sprint, try to look at high-end power. And then I'll look at, maybe some barbell cycling work. So whether that be, 30 snatches for time at a certain percentage, or, hey, we're going to do, Grace at 185. I also look at like gymnastics density and kind of judge that based on where they're at. For a relatively newer person, or maybe someone who doesn't have as strong gymnastics, I might say, hey, let's just do a max set of chest bars, right? And it might come out to like 10, let's just say, right? But for someone who is like, I know is like, all right, this person's probably can do 50, 30, 40, 50, 60 unbroken chest bars, like asking them to do a max set is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so for those folks, it might be, putting that in a sports specific Metcon format and using that as a tester. And then,
or like send me your qualifier videos, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Or maybe instead of a max set, it's like, all right, we're doing 3 minutes for max reps of toes to bar, or whatever the case is. And then I always try to do some sort of sports specific, like I said, CrossFit style conditioning piece to lay a baseline. So it might be one of the girl workouts, might be like Helen or Nancy or Jackie, just to name a few. But yeah, as the athletes get more advanced, I don't normally I'll use some of those things, especially obviously the strength numbers as well as like the cyclical numbers. But as we progress in our coaching relationship, I'll find other things to basically leverage as testers, right? So we said like 22.2, right? Let's say I had an athlete that did really poorly on that.
Yeah,
well,
they already have a baseline.
That's now a benchmark, right?
Yeah.
For us, because we know we struggled with that. And then if I can pinpoint the aspects of that you struggled with, whether it was, oh, you know what, our breathing just isn't good on a bar facing burpee, or our breathing isn't good on a deadlift, or the combination of the double hinging movements really got us, or whatever the case is. And then I'll build out a progression on that. And then we'll retest it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks later. Right. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded way to say, yes, I have specific benchmarks that I use, but then as the relationship progresses, those benchmarks and what we might be looking at mold and shift based on what that athlete needs at that time.
Yeah, man, right on. I think the testers have to change based on athlete level. Like, not all of them, right? Like, you're still going to have probably like, you know, maybe you don't have a beginner work to a max snatch, right? If they're a true beginner, but like you still might have them like, hey, work to a heavy back squat and see what it looks like, sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's probably smart to give like a bunch of athletes similar looks when you're testing, but then like also get more specific with an athlete based on what they are coming to you to basically fix, right? Because typically people aren't hiring a coach because everything's going perfectly well, right? It's like typically they have some frustration. Like, if you're making the progress that you want to make on your own, you're not going to hire a coach. It's like when you're like, man, like I cannot figure out this ring muscle up. All right, I'm going to hire a coach to help me figure out this process and to organize my training, right? It's like, when you're trying to figure out and help an athlete troubleshoot a specific capacity they have, maybe, or, you know, typically if it's skill, you're just going to do video review. So typically it's more capacity based. That's when you sort of like either use like these testers that you've used on other athletes. So you can do sort of a side-by-side comparison. Like, hey, this is what this semifinals hopeful girl is doing right now. So if you want to get to a semifinal, you're going to have to probably be at least at this level on a tester like this, right? You can start to draw those comparisons, or you could do it where you have an athlete and you're comparing them against themselves. So for example, you create a custom tester for an athlete who, you know, you've likely have never done this for another athlete before. You like make up a movement combination that, you know, is going to be, you know, exacerbate the problem that's going to be. And then you, again, build a progression around that and then retest it and see where they're at. So do you tend to bias one of those two, where it's like more so universal things where I can compare you against other people and compare you against the pool of data that's already out there, or maybe that you have or that we have, versus like creating custom testers for athletes?
I think it depends. That's a classic answer when it comes to coaching. I think it depends. I think for an elite level athlete, you tend to look more at the field because you need to know what aspects, kind of where they need to be. And so that might be like, let's call it 60-40, right? You look at okay, this is what's required of someone who's a semifinal athlete, right?
Yeah.
For people who are a little bit lower than that, I would say for me, it might be like it's way more testers for the individual, right? And it's way more of like, hey, you know, we are no good at this, so we are going to test this and we are going to build progressions off of this, and then we're going to retest this.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, right, if we have something you're not good at and I can build out a progression to get you better at it, you're going to improve on the leaderboard. Like, the leaderboard's an afterthought at that point.
Yeah.
It's as a result of the progress you're doing here. And even if you don't, let's say you don't get higher on the leaderboard, well, that doesn't affect your improvement here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you don't improve on the leaderboard, not because you didn't improve, but you know what? Other people just got better at that. and they were already a little bit better than you at that. And so, but that doesn't take away the fact that you PR'd your back squat by 20 pounds this year, or like, you improved your time in this workout by a minute and a half. Like, it's like, so I would say the vast majority of what I look at is, okay, this tester is specific. We're measuring or trying to measure this skill or this physical aspect. And we're doing that because this is something, frankly, you're not that great at. And so we need to improve on that to get to where you eventually want to go.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, that's almost exclusively what I do for almost all my athletes, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, we can look at like, man, you didn't do great in this workout in quarterfinals. Why isn't that the case? Give me your subjective feedback to that. Figure out like, how did you feel when you were in the middle of that workout? But like, even then that's subjective at best a lot of the times. Like mm-hmm. why you blew up in a chest to bar workout, like it's hard to know exactly if that's accurate versus like mm-hmm. if we take, an AMRAP of 5 minutes of chest to bar or 100 for time, right? And you were 821 and now you're 612. It's like, man, you were going to be doing better in a chest bar workout. Like, yeah. Like there's just no way around it. Like if you improve that much, like you're going to improve versus something else. Right. So it's super objective. And I think if nothing else, like you can just point to that progress as the coach and be like, this is how far we've come. Like it's very measurable. Like we're not measuring you in terms of like, for example, if you're looking at like a leaderboard where you get that frequency of like once a year, you get a quarterfinals leaderboard and it's like, hey, you went from, 612th to 579. It's like, man, it's pretty hard to say or is your fitness that much different? Right. Like, they could be dramatically better in fitness. And last year was just more of a hip dominated testing body. And now it's around the shoulder. And you're a female who hasn't done a lot of contractions around the shoulder in your life. Like you could be like 20% better. And it shows you just had this tiny improvement on the leaderboard. So I think it's super helpful to have those type of testers where you can be like, you got this much better. And because we ran this progression for this movement. And it's like, that is super like helpful for the athlete, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. Because again, right, especially in this sport, what's asked and tested is ever changing. Right. And so you could look like a dynamo one year and the next year feel like, oh man, I didn't get any better or I barely got better. And it's like, you look at the testing body and it's like, man, you're 6'4" and this entire year was squatting, right? Like it was, let's just say it was all thrusters and this, that. And it's like in an open format, like, sorry, like you're not going to do as well as someone who's of equal fitness level and 5'5". Like it is what it is.
There's a reason Vikowski doesn't win all the qualifiers.
Yeah. And so like, not to go down that rabbit hole, but mostly just saying like, if there's a qualifier that doesn't go as well as you want, right? But you can look back and be like, you know what, my fitness has improved. These just weren't great workouts for me. It doesn't stop you from wanting to improve, but it just gives you a dose of reality that like, you know what, one qualifier doesn't dictate the progress of your entire year. So that's why it's important to have kind of those individual markers. And something I've kind of used sporadically is I like to have my athletes focus on the persistent pursuit of progress, because you can always progress in some aspect. And it's when people start comparing or looking at how other people got to where they got and this, that, and the other thing, where people start to doubt themselves or feel badly about their journey, when it's like, I like to say also, like, better is better. Like if you got better, then it's better. So let's focus on those aspects as opposed to, the things that maybe are not as objective to measure.
Totally agree. Like find the ways that you can point to wins in the training. Mm-hmm. Like guarantee like your athletes are getting better. Like let's show them that they are.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks for doing this today. I mean, I know we could talk for a long time about training. I mean, you can see what we're passionate about. Where can people find you and reach out to you if they got questions for you?
Yeah. So you can reach out to my newly minted ZOAR email address, chris@zoarfitness.com,
Yes.
on Instagram, at C_hard_fit. Those would be the main two spots that you could probably reach out to me is, through Instagram or, email.
Yeah. And when this airs, you will have your own page on the website. People can check out that. I'll make sure to link to it. So go check out Chris's page. You can learn a little bit more about him there. And yeah, you're taking clients. So if you're interested, reach out to Chris.
Let's make it happen.
Sweet, man. Thanks for doing this today.
You got it, Ben.
Hey, it's Ben again. Thanks for listening today. To be completely honest, it's been really rewarding to have people who listen to the show regularly reach out to me, whether they have a question about training or just to say hey. So if you haven't done that yet, do it. I'm pretty good about getting back to people, and you can feel free to email me, ben@zoarfitness.com, or message me on Instagram @zoarfitness. And graciously, I've had some people reach out to me and ask how they can support the show. Number one way that you can support the show if you are a regular listener is just by rating the show. Most apps have a platform where you can actually rate it, and on Apple Podcasts, you can write a review as well. This is super helpful in having other coaches and athletes find the podcast, but also just having it grow and for me to continue to want to put out more and more content. Also, I'm going to be posting more full episodes of the Fitness Movement to our YouTube channel. So if you're someone who actually enjoys seeing my face when I talk, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe if you please. And if you're someone who is watching on YouTube, you have the ability to like our videos, but then you can also comment on the video if you have questions about the episode or if you want to suggest a topic for a future episode. And lastly, if you're someone who really does value what we're putting out, I would encourage you to hire a coach. For me, coaching is the bulk of my job, and it's what I believe I do best. So if you're an athlete or a coach looking to up your fitness game, be sure to reach out. You can message me on Instagram @ZOARFitness or email me, ben@zoarfitness.com. Thanks again for listening today. And as always, stay the course.